A large, well-liked family absent from church. A bride-to-be nowhere to be found a day before her wedding. A usually crowded, bustling cottage, now quiet as the grave. These were the ominous signs that drew neighbors to the home of their village blacksmith on a May morning in 1870. What they found there would rattle the little community of Denham to its bones. Welcome back to Victorian True Crime, a series devoted to the sensational criminal cases that defined an era obsessed with civility, sin, and spectacle. Today, we're talking about the Marshall family massacre. At the age of 35, Emmanuel Marshall was a man with an enviable life. Raised in the Buckinghamshire village of Denham, Emmanuel had found success as the local blacksmith and now lived a comfortable life in a tidy cottage with his wife Charlotte, their 4 young children, and his elderly mother Mary. That May of 1870, there was another resident living in the cottage. Emmanuel's sister, Mary Ann, was only days away from marrying her longtime sweetheart and had come to stay at the family home in preparation for the wedding. On Monday morning, May 23rd, a strange silence rang from the blacksmith's cottage. This was unusual, as Emmanuel was known to rise early and set immediately to work in his smithy. And with 4 young children and a wedding only a day away, the house should have been buzzing. Later that morning, the dressmaker arrived to deliver Mary Ann's wedding dress. When her repeated knocks at the door went unanswered, the neighbors, already wary, alerted authorities. When they forced their way into the cottage, they were met with a scene beyond imagining. Charlotte and Mary Ann were found first, lying across one another in a pool of blood just inside the doorway. The young mother and bride-to-be were both still in their nightdresses, their heads horribly battered. Mary and 3 of the 4 Marshall children were found similarly bludgeoned to death on an upper floor of the cottage. The children stacked on top of one another before a fireplace. A sledgehammer was found near the bodies, liberally covered in blood. With Emmanuel nowhere to be found, those first on the scene wondered in horror whether the well-liked, upstanding blacksmith had massacred his family and fled. But upon searching the property further, they found Emmanuel lying face down on the floor of his smithy, bludgeoned beyond recognition. The investigation began in earnest and proceeded incredibly quickly, even by modern standards. Fortunately for the police, they had an important initial lead to pursue. It was noticed right away that several things had been stolen from the Marshall house, including Emmanuel's best clothes. Witnesses recalled that early the previous morning, a Sunday, they had seen a well-dressed man leaving the cottage with a canvas bag. Recognizing the clothing, they had simply assumed it was Emmanuel. Now that it was clear it could not have been the blacksmith they had seen, police at once set about trying to find this mysterious man. That same day, a bricklayer named Charles Coombe came forward with another crucial tip. Over the weekend, Coombe had shared a room in a boarding house with a man who had called himself Jack. Only days out of prison, Jack had arrived at the boarding house on Friday night, desperate and dirty, with hardly a penny to his name. Coombe's suspicions were aroused when Jack was absent the following night, only to return on Sunday morning dressed in entirely different clothes and suddenly flush with cash. Thanks to Coombe, police were able to track the man called Jack to another boarding house in a nearby town. There, a dramatic confrontation ensued. Attempting to resist arrest, Jack pulled a pistol on the police, who were fortunately able to disarm him and take him into custody. And though he denied having anything to do with the murders, the fact that he was actually wearing Emmanuel's clothes and watch at the time he was apprehended did not help his case. Several items belonging to the Marshalls were also found in his possession, as well as receipts for other items he had already pawned for cash. Jack was brought to the county magistrate's seat at Slough to be tried for murder. Even with the police escort, he almost didn't make it to court. The Marshalls had been respected and well-liked, and their murderer had shocked and horrified the entire county. As word of the arrest circulated, hundreds of people gathered at the train station to await the accused's arrival. The sight of him set the crowd into a frenzy, and Jack was almost lynched by the angry mob before being hastened into the courthouse. But who was this man? Why would he so viciously murder an entire family, including 3 children under the age of 10? Over the course of the trial, much of the horrible truth of the man and the massacre would come to light. As it turned out, his name was not Jack, but John Owen. He was a vagrant and a petty criminal who had only recently been released from prison for larceny and sheep rustling. He was also a disgraced former blacksmith. And herein lay the horrendous and horrendously inadequate motive. The trial revealed that some years back, Emmanuel had hired Owen to do some work at his smithy, but he had done such a shoddy job that Emmanuel refused to pay him. After heated words, the two parted in anger, and it's very likely that Emmanuel had quickly forgotten about the incident. Owen, however, had not. After his release, witnesses overheard him speaking of a man in Denham who owed him money. They also heard him swear that he would, quote, murder the villain if he did not pay up. John Owen was convicted and sentenced to death. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Owen replied that his only regret was not shooting the policeman who had arrested him. Charming. This piece of human garbage was hanged at Aylesbury Jail on August 8, 1870. The only member of the Marshall family to survive the massacre was the youngest child, a 1-year-old boy named Francis who had been staying with relatives at the time to make room in the cottage for the bride-to-be. In a very sad addendum to this already horrible story, the orphan Francis lived only to the age of 12 before following his family to the grave, too young to remember the faces of those he had lost. All the Marshalls are buried together in a family plot at St. Mary's in Denham. 8 lives destroyed, all because of one man's vengeful act of unthinkable violence.